Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I'm looking forward to this. Just give me a second. I think before we start, so we are recording the session. We will be sharing this with you, with some excerpts from, permissible excerpts from Alex, as well as the, the overall presentation webinar. So we'll share that with you at the end. So we've taken, I think, all precautions to make sure, that we don't have bots joining, all the necessary security measures. And if I may request, please, we can use the chat, but I will only put across questions to Alex at appropriate times, so that we allow the flow of the presentation as we go through it. All right. So just from an introduction point of view, my name is Marlon Kamesa. I am part of the HUCMI family. That is the Human Change Management Institute. We've got a whole lot more detail on our website at the bottom there, www.hucmi.com. But essentially, we are HCM bulk training centers. We have over 33 worldwide that we've opened up, running in various languages. We represent the English-speaking countries from our side. We have in the past also included change to AI, as well as HCM bulk to Agile, and some training focused on leadership change management as well. So that's basically, in summary, what we are all about. We also we are affiliated with the Change Management Alliance. Sharon will speak a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation in terms of how you can join that collaborative change management community. All right, so before we get started, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Alex is a fellow at Oxford Saïd Business School, specializing in project management, especially in IT infrastructure, energy, mega events, and change. He directs the Hong Kong and Australian major projects leadership programs and teaches on various Oxford courses. Previously, he worked at T-Mobile International and McKinsey's Business Technology Office. As a co-founder of Oxford Global Projects, he applies research and data-driven insights into real-world projects. So let me please welcome Alex as he presents Unlocking the Secrets of Successful Change. These are insights that he's going to share with us from over 1,800 studies, 160 executive interviews, and plus 150 digital transformation projects. So without further ado, Alex, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marlon. And wonderful. And good afternoon, everyone. So the way we want to structure this, so we've booked this for an hour and a half to give us ample of time to present. So the idea is that I'm going to give you an overview of our research I've been doing and the findings of that for about sort of in the first 20 minutes. So that's a general overview. Then we can do Q&A and discuss on that. I think our group is small enough to hopefully get a conversation going amongst all of ourselves. And then I've got another deep dive into one of those areas that are particularly impactful according to our research. So, and that I've got content there for another 20 minutes or so, and then we can do another round of discussions and questions after that. So that's the planned structure for the next 90 minutes that we have, for 80 minutes now. And to follow along, I obviously made a PowerPoint, and I hope you should be able to see that now. Good. So it's all about organizational change. And these are the research findings here at Oxford. We did this research project now, it's probably started almost 8 years ago, with that great idea of really understanding what happens and what leads to the success of change when we have initiatives that have to do change to technologies, so digital technologies, and to the organization at the same time. So that's kind of the backdrop of the research and why we wanted to understand this. And we also wanted to understand it because the predominant thinking sort of that we had was back, sort of about 10 years ago. I think so you probably found sort of agile finding widespread adoption across organizations. And therefore, how we think about technological change that had evolved very dramatically from sort of the kind of status where it was before, say like 20 or 30 years ago, when a lot of kind of like, waterfall and those kind of process models were used to say, deal with the technological side. So we wanted to see also whether the interplay has changed now that the technology has become, agile, or at least some sort of hybrid principle in agile, as probably most organizations will recognize. But I had a nice bit of research funding, and that meant that I could hire some research assistants, and that meant that we started reading a lot. And to our grand surprise, actually, when we started to look into this, the very first book on change, and so when you do both of these things, you change the organization and you change the underlying technology, or there is a technology-led or heavily influenced change going on in the organization. The very first book wasn't from like the advent of computers. It was from before, it was from the 1930s. And in the 1930s, something really interesting happened. And so the really interesting thing for us now that we can look at survivors to this is that the Great Depression happened, particularly in America and in Europe. And that massive economic collapse led to sort of one massive industry at that point in time was textile manufacturing in the US, cotton manufacturing in the US. And the Great Depression meant that the domestic demand for cotton in the US was completely evaporating. So suddenly revenue base is shrinking, everybody is under massive pressures. The cost of operating these textile mills is no longer sustainable. So that kind of was the context of this big revolution. Now, the next interesting thing that happened at that point in time, so that was kind of the pressure. The solution was with technological advancements in the loom, but actually more so with ideas of Taylorism and scientific management that started really to take hold in the 1930s. And so it was two types of technology, one way of re-engineering processes and the other way to actually do with the tools that were used in the manufacturing industry. And the big shift, basically what happened was there that sort of the highest paid worker in a textile mill is the loom supervisor. And the loom supervisor, very highly paid worker. And in the classic model, and the old model before this change, that a loom supervisor would work for the whole of its shift, their shift, on one loom. And they will have to look after the loom, they would do preventive maintenance. If there's any issues happening, fabric ripping, the loom running out of thread, then they would restock the loom. They would keep the thing running, basically, for the whatever hours they worked on. I think back then was way longer than 8 hours, probably 12 or so. So the first big idea was sort of the looms were improved, needed less maintenance, were made more reliable, were designed slightly differently. And the other thing from scientific management was then that we have to reconfigure these roles. So some of the work that these highly paid loom weavers, the loom supervisors, would do were split out, and the role was roughly split in three. So there was a loom supervisor, there was a weaver, and then there were, in the language of the 1930s, the bobbin girls that you see here and the bobbin boys. So tasks that could be done in the loom, so the bobbin girls here, they would, for instance, make sure that all the thread goes onto the bobbins, that the bobbins are filled, and then the bobbin boys take the bobbins from this part of the manufacturing, put them into the loom. And that could be done with cheaper labor. So that was the big change. Now, in this new way of working, taking these lower value activities away, suddenly it meant that a weaver had, or a loom supervisor had time to look after 14 looms instead of one per shift. You can imagine that this had sort of cost implications. You could take 30 to 40% of the cost out. Now, the really interesting thing happened in the 1930s, and that is that the whole industry adopted this technology. They all went for it. They all adopted this new ways of working, this new way of designing processes, the new loom technology, and this whole thing, the technology combined with the blueprints for the operating models, they were called the multi-loom system, meaning that a weaver could now look after multiple looms per shift. And the interesting thing that came out of this was that some textile mills were really successful in switching to the new model. They lowered their cost, they survived the Great Depression, and they're still around. Some of the most expensive fabric on the planet is heirloom cotton in the US. Probably more expensive because there's such a few manufacturing base of this these days, but they're still around producing this heritage cotton. And other textile mills, they saw things like strike actions and in sabotage into this, and in some parts of the Eastern Seaboard, well, yeah, so this is South Carolina here, so not quite the Eastern Seaboard, but in some parts it actually ended up with bloody suppression of the textile mill strikes. And as you can see here, that martial law was declared, National Guard came in, suppressed the strikes. People died. Protesters got shot in this upheaval. So that was the really interesting. That was kind of the backdrop. Now, that caught the attention of an economics researcher called Elliot Dunlap Smith. And he started to go out in these textile mills and started to investigate how this change had been managed in textile mills where it ended up in sabotage, walkout, strikes, ultimately actually in the bankruptcy of the textile mill. And he went into the other ones that successfully made the transition and continue to exist. And he started to compare these two. So brilliant piece of research, really. And here's from his book, and the book came out in 1939. Here's this my favorite quote from the book, and I think, you know, it's almost 100 years old, but it still rings true today when he writes that, well, you can read it here, change is like a wedding, but ought to be entered into soberly, reverently, into the fear of God, and may I add, with sufficient financial resource to see through much more expenditure than is superficially apparent. And that, I think, summarizes really neatly what we learn about change. He had some other really interesting insights. Again, 100 years ago, he observed these things, good change versus bad change. And the first one, revolutionary change, did not work. So switching over to the new technology, to new patterns of working overnight or on a Monday morning at the start of a working week did not work. So, you know, it's kind of that big bang switch over always ended up in disaster. A second observation, coming back to the wedding quote as well, you need to change in good times. So you need to change cost money, effort, and time. So if you have run out of money, if you have run out of people, if you have run out of time, it's too late, unfortunately. So, you know, then it's very hard it doesn't work. So change costs money. So you have to change before you're forced to it. So that's the second big observation here. The third one, which I find really interesting, because before I read this book, I had never really picked up on that. But when change is introduced in the workplace, management starts to own all issues, all stuff that happens after the change. And that is really interesting, because it's kind of the thing, isn't that these weavers, you know, they would deal with stuff all the time. Right? They would do like little errors, they would fix little errors, they would, you know, find creative workarounds if something wasn't going very well. But suddenly, because the factory owners and management decided that the work needs to be reorganized, the technology is going to change, every single risk, every single issue was escalated. You know, you started to fiddle with this, almost like nothing was solved at the frontline workers and the frontline managers or first line managers. And that suddenly, that kind of change situation created a massive burden on the change leaders, on the managers. And that, once the managers are burned out and overloaded, obviously that ends in chaos. the managers that thought beforehand about what could possibly go wrong, what could be the issues, try to discover these issues for themselves and their solution, so that switched from firefighting to prevention. They were the ones that actually were successful in implementing these new ways of working. The other ones struggled. The fourth great insight was that all the textile mills that were successful, they started to experiment first. So they were not the ones, so they used it in one production line. They used it in the night shift only. They used it in one corner of their factory. They started the experiments. Very often management, shift supervisors would also, they took part in this. They basically worked a shift with the new looms to find out how they are working. Managers would work on the new looms for a shift to actually find out what could possibly go wrong. That kind of is that preventative mindset. And that was really successful, where, when that didn't happen, when they didn't experiment, when they went cold in and didn't learn before the launch, then it ended in disaster. The fifth one here is wonderful. The book itself has at least 1 or 2 chapters as a massive diatribe against top management consultants. In the 1930s, there was a new profession, and they back then were not called consultants, but efficiency engineers. That was the language of the time. And the really interesting thing is that he argues, quite logically, they're paid per hour or per day. They're typically paid by top management. They're quite expensive. So they need to come up with solutions quickly. And the interaction with top management typically oversimplifies the issue. Smith, in their analysis, actually found out that if you want to, this is not going to be helpful for anybody's career here, neither mine nor yours, but if you ever manage a textile factory, one of the most important things in a textile factory is cleanliness. So dust levels because the dust attaches to the fabric, the dust attaches to the threads, and then they break. And when they break, they need to be fixed, the machine needs to stop, and all sorts of things happen. So it's really bad. So actually, the best thing to improve operational reliability of a textile mill is to talk first. The first person you should talk to is the janitor, and look at their brooms and their cleaning schedule and optimize and make the factory cleaner than it is at the moment. That's the most important thing you can do, right? An issue, when you're a top management consultant paid for by the CEO, you will probably not ever talk to the janitor. So that's kind of the thing that happens, and that's why here's a big thing against consultants. And the other thing against consultants was that in nearly all textile factories, and almost all textile factories where consultants were brought in to facilitate the change, rather than change being driven by first-line management or the factory management, there was backsliding of the operational gains afterwards. So I think it's I put them in here in full, actually. These 6 things, lots of other little observation in there. The book is long out of print. It took me a long time to hunt down a copy. It's a great little book. And here's the 6 key issues. And I just put it in because that was sort of great insights 100 years ago, when for the first time somebody looked at what happens, how do we manage organizational change and technology at the same time. And these were great observations from 100 years ago that still ring true today, but we know a lot more. So there has been an explosion, as you all know, being practitioners in this field, there has been explosions in the writing of change. So we prepared for this research project sort of in 2018, 2019. Right. So we took a full cut of the literature back then. And so it was about 1,800 articles, as you can see here. And then we started reading all of them. And I put some interesting hallmarks in here. So there's, of course, Kotter's 8 Steps of Change. Those were published in 1995. And that sort of was a catalytic moment of propelling it really forward and suddenly making it its own interesting discipline. The other thing that I put in here is 1999, when psychologists working on change started to, take away that awful phrase resistance to change and replace it with commitment to change, or the lack thereof. And which I think is a much better phrasing. And I put it in here because in every single talk, I always like to remind us that almost a quarter of a century, 25 years ago, we got rid of this awful phrase, resistance to change, and replaced it with lack of commitment to change as such an important thing. And the other thing here, as you can see, also similar time frame in 2001, we had the Agile Manifesto, which completely revolutionized, or brought it to everybody's forefront, the idea of developing the technology side of things, of these transformations in a different way than before. And again, the Agile Manifesto was again one more of those moments that really accelerated that journey. Other things, if you actually go back, the ideas of Agile are much, much older. They're almost as old as computing itself, with things like adaptive programming, as it was called before it became Agile. Agile is just a better name. But also things like rational rows, etc. So, as part of this research, we started to look at all sorts of frameworks as well. And then we summarized those frameworks. So, and as you can see here, there's lots and lots of frameworks out there. I started a little butterfly connection. So across all the different frameworks for change, all the bodies of knowledge. You can see some here, you see Kotters, you see ProSize, ATCA there. There's the freeze, refreeze model, Kurt Lewin, good old Chestnut. So there's about 120 of those. And then we worked with practitioners and academics in a whole series of workshops to solidify those into what are kind of the fundamental assumptions, things that need to be true about the change. And we called them levers because they're kind of levers you can pull and for your change. So we didn't call them steps because they're not in a logical order. They're more like ingredients to a recipe to make successful change. And out of all those readings that we did in these workshops, out came 7. And the first one was that we need to have a defined approach. It's kind of a framework as a process model to introducing the new tech, to introducing the changes, the organizational change that goes with it. The second thing is that we need to have a clear vision or a clear rationale or clear purpose for the new in the organization. The third one was that management needs to take ownership. The fourth is that trust must be built, both in the change as well as in the leaders of the change. That we need to involve users early. That's a big mantra of the Agile community. We need to be effective in communicating, and we need to have effective training. So those were the kind of the 7 levers that we drilled out of those. And then, as you heard Marlon say in the beginning, we actually went out and looked at the results. So, and Roland, thanks for the quote. I've got a copy here. So that's the published research. Intelligent Change is the book. We went out, interviewed 160 executives involved in 155 digital transformations, and looked at these digital transformations and looked at their transformation success. So how good were they at realizing the intended benefits, having the impact on the organization that they needed. We also were looking into the system adoption rates, user satisfaction, stakeholder satisfaction, satisfaction by the change at the project team. Were they happy? Were they happy with the work they did in the project? And that informed how we thought about success. We also asked them about, did they deliver it on budget at time? But turns out that was actually not that important to the success. That's quite different from things like actually making an impact on the organization. So what we found there is it's a real interesting thing. So it's a summary of of the findings, and now we can talk about these things. And I grouped them. So the 7 levers you see here at the top. So how much did each of these levers explain the transformation success? You can see here trust is the biggest. Trust explains 1/4 of the variation of success between the different organizations. So trust by far is the biggest lever. The next one is effective communication. And then we have effective training, and then we have management ownership. And those 4 are the statistically significant ones. When it goes below 2% there, if it only explains 1%, it could explain 0. So there we stand, and we don't have any firm evidence that this actually works. So we did not find that a clear reason, a clear vision, good rationale, a good purpose for the change, for the new, is adding anything. Actually, it didn't. we found quite the opposite. The clearer the vision, and particularly when it comes to top management, the greater the lack of commitment of change. So it definitely doesn't make people want the change or commit to it and like it. So that didn't work. A defined approach didn't also work. So all the frameworks and stuff like that seemed pretty useless. We found that the defined approach is good when you have to pitch the project and get resources and money for the change. So whatever investment board in the company you have to go to, then they want to see a framework, but as soon as you've got the money, it's not going to help in the execution. And early user involvement did nothing, just did nothing. Seems like a good idea, but doesn't do it. Didn't work most of the cases. So look at 155 of these digital transformations, and only very, very few of them can really pull it off. So to get really high quality, good user engagement going is really, really hard. So we didn't see anybody. It might be a good idea. According to our data, it's so hard to do. It didn't work. And that means, all these 7 change management levers together is about half of the success of the digital transformations. And then we have 3 more that are more classic project management technology related, that are not part of these 7. And we tested all the classic project management success factors and technology success factors that we need to know from the computer science and software development folks, etc., from the project management body of knowledge. And the first one is good commercials. It's very important. So particular change these days, we could talk about AI and whatnot, but things like milestone-based payments never work. And so, a lot of forms of contracting are completely misaligned to how change is delivered. The second thing here is processing complexity, and that is technical. So how data is processed, very specifically data. So it's about data flows and understanding the data architecture. So that's where a lot of these projects fell over. So that explains a good chunk of success. And then the last one is internal resourcing. So where change was outsourced or there were great gaps in the project, in the change initiative, in we've kind of personnel gaps here, that didn't work. So neither did it work when they were mostly run by externals. So it needs to have a good sustainable ratio of internal working with externals. It can't be completely given over to an external organization. That was the last thing that's been success. So all these factors here that we can explain is a good 58% of the success, of the variation of the success between the different organizations in our research, which is a pretty good way. It's a pretty high explanatory thing for something that's so complicated in the social sciences. So that's kind of where I wanted to, exactly, that's where I kind of wanted to stop, go off screen share, and actually really start to think about this and have a conversation about this and see what you think, reflections, comments, questions. Let's discuss what you've just seen, and then I've got later on a section of the 20 minutes where I can dive deeper into the biggest lever, trust.
Right. We open for questions. I think just from my side, Alex, I think this really undoes what I've grown up to, or rather what's been imparted upon me in previous projects. Is it possible just to break down, what you mean by trust? What elements of trust? I'm just amazed at this particular finding and the heavy weighting that it has. But maybe just for my own understanding, maybe for others as well, just a breakdown.
Yeah, we will go a little bit. Well, we're actually going to more into trust building actions in a second. But so let's think about what the trust means. So the trust means that so you look to trust in 2 different ways. One is by stakeholders. So you have the senior stakeholders that oversee the change. So the sponsors, the top management in our organization, so the people that basically provide the money, sponsor the change, set the objectives for the change, the stakeholders, that they trust the change initiative, so that the change initiative, they trust that they're going to deliver, they trust the people in there, that they know what they're doing, you know, and sort of they feel basically that the team that has been assembled to deliver the change, that they're a safe pair of hands. You know, so there's a big element of trust for that.
All right.
And and same thing, we then also look from the trust from the user base, from the user community. So typically frontline workers or first line workers that, you know, will have to use a new piece of technology, or, you know, if it's not a new piece of technology, you know, process change, they will have to work in a different way, you know, those kind of employees in the organizations. And so whether they trusted this new initiative coming in, you know, and so we ask sort of a bit more in the abstract, whether they trusted them, so whether they trusted the change, so whether they trusted kind of the content, the direction the organization wanted to go, but also whether they trusted the team delivering it. Ultimately, it's always a person relationship, right? So there's definitely kind of like, you know, if I like the person, but I'm not quite clear, you know, should I really trust this piece of technology or whatever, you know, but I trusted that we will go on a journey, so I'm happy to go with it. So that's how we looked at the trust. And we also looked at the trust in the way, you know, we didn't only take their word for it, but we also looked for sort of things that it then enables, you know, sort of in higher trust organizations. So if you have good relations with other stakeholders and they trust your project, right, resources become much easier available. You have easy access to experts, you know, in their teams. You know, if the head of HR trusts the change initiatives, then you can actually draw on subject matter experts from HR much easier, or finance and so on. You know, those kind of things we measured as well. So just to see, you know, not taking their word for it, but, you know,
that's it.
Yeah, to actually see sort of the expected manifestations of that. Yeah.
All right. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to you breaking down a little bit further later on. We have Roland. You've got your hand up.
Hi, Alex. Good to see you again. I'm happy to announce that I was your student at the MMPM program for the master's program in Oxford. A quick question here. If you're managing a global project, and what I mean is that if you're managing a project where you have different tribes, different ethnic groups, different culture that interplays on the project, how much of these, if there is a cultural clash, how much does it affect the trust on the project?
That's an interesting one, right? And so the interesting thing is that, you know, we've data on 155 of these digital transformations, and they are pretty global sample. So they span all the way from North America to Japan to anything in the middle. And so the other day I tried to actually, because Roland, thank you. Maybe you even asked me the question when we were in Oxford. That so I try to look for geographic differences. You know, is this kind of ranking the same in Japan as it is in South Africa? Is it the same in Germany, where I'm from, as it is in the UK? Is it different in the US or Canada? And we couldn't find, there is no changes there. So it is pretty stable with sort of kind of, this is kind of the hierarchy. This is the biggest priorities of, these are the biggest levers to make change happen, whether you work in that cultural context or that cultural context. Now, you know, that's sort of, you know, not saying that sort of that when you're actually then leading a change initiative and you have an intercultural team that you need to bring together, they're probably also from different organizations that all have different ways of working and different value sets, right? That is a culture clash in the making, and you have to start working hard to bring these people together into a cohesive change team that can then work, and then they can work on these things together with the organization, right? So there's, you know, friction there, obviously, but it didn't change that kind of like, what are kind of the key ingredients for success. Same thing also across industries. So we've got lots of different industries in there, from like, you know, public sector, you know, sort of citizen-facing things and municipalities, to central government things, to big engineering projects. You know, we have good big blue chip companies in there, pharmaceuticals, you know, big semiconductor manufacturers and those kind of folks, you know, vast range of things. And again, so we went through that. There is no difference in any of these 7 levers by industry. So it's very fascinating that this kind of, we call them robustness checks have been carried out. Yeah.
Right, great stuff. Thank you so much for that, Alex. Anyone else with any question from what has just been presented so far? All right.
So I'm just looking into Rory's very Rory's
yes.
showing numbers in the chat, and we'll come to trust in a second. So that will probably Robert has an interesting view on that. I'm going to propose also 4 ingredients, slightly different labels, so maybe we can have a chat about and how those align. That's a good one.
Right.
Going that, and Rory is looking at psychological safety in teams. Yeah. All right. Okay. I see. Yeah. Also very interesting in the change volume and the change willingness. Yeah. With Gartner reports, I would always be a little bit careful, since sometimes I tell you unclear how Gartner measures things. But they make good eye-catching numbers, don't they? Just yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a very interesting thing. But it's also a very interesting thing, actually, sort of just in reflecting on that. When we did the research, we interviewed a couple of people. One transformation project that they did something in a call center. So lots of tech refresh and new processes and all of that kind of in a call center, and, AI and blah, blah, blah. And the people that were hired to deliver the change, so consultants and the vendor, they really struggled to engage with the end users. So the end users were clearly frustrated. Obviously, the old system was very clunky, it didn't work, and but it was so difficult to actually have a conversation and get feedback on prototypes, feedback on new process, feedback on ideas. It was just really, really impossible, right? And I think that's a really interesting thing, because you could definitely for sure tell them, right, that these people all talk to their family at home about what they thought. They just didn't share, or wouldn't share, or couldn't really express themselves when presented with these consultants. So it's a really interesting, case in there. And it took them a while. The case is one of the little stories in the book that my co-authors contributed, because they worked on that project, what they went through to actually find out and how to adopt their communication style. What we say is you have to explain it in their words what that means. But actually that translation, it's not just about languages and using words they use. It can be really complicated sometimes, and sometimes we just don't understand. And then you look like an idiot.
Great stuff.
Which is another great example in here where we're talking about trust, is that they did a cultural change program with one of the big offshore oil and gas companies. And in that transformation program, they hired some actors to play workers was the safety initiative. They wanted to change the safety culture of those workers. And in that video, the worker did something that I think I forgot what it was. I think they took the helmet off to eat a sandwich or something like that. So it was a small detail, had nothing to do with the actual content of the video, anything like that, but it was a small detail. And then immediately, once that video was shared company-wide, everybody was shouting and saying, we would never ever do that. I think they carried their sandwich in their helmet or whatever. And, and I was like, in real life, nobody ever does this. This is total crap, right? So suddenly the trust in the change was completely obliterated, because it was very clear that it came from the center, from people who've never been on an oil rig, who didn't even talk to the people they want to educate, all of those kind of things came back and completely splashed and exploded in their face. and just because of my teeny tiny detail in a training video, which eroded all that trust. So that's I think also why it gets why it's so challenging. Teddy, thanks for coming.
Teddy.
Hi, yes, thank you, Alex. It's good to see you again. And thanks for teaching me on my masters. One thing I wanted to quiz you about was the secrets of successful change. I'm still encountering, after so many years, this almost ambivalence about benefits realization. So change management or people change management is now pushing the forefront on transformation. I'm seeing it in my current company and I saw it in my previous one. So delivering the project, embedding the benefits, or embedding the change and making sure that the change is sustainable. But when it comes down to actually confirming that there's a return on investment, for some strange reason, some companies are still refusing to do that, as if there's a nervousness or just a barrier. So what have you encountered this, and what would be your suggestions on how to get benefits realization, the confirmation that there is a return on investment on the table in the boardroom so that it can be cascaded to the managers?
Yes. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I've seen organizations that just don't care, right? So, or don't seemingly care. It might be different reasons for that. Let's come to that in a second. So, where you don't talk about the benefits, you don't talk about the benefits realization, right? It's almost like, it's something nice to have, or I don't know why they don't want to. So, have countless of those where that's really, that's an issue for them. I think, and like another thing, so if you talk to other projects, they don't even care about the budgets or the timelines or anything like that, right? They just don't care. Go to Saudi Arabia, nobody cares about money, and what things cost when they build stuff there at the moment, and so that's not important to them. To them, it's only important timelines. Interesting enough, right? And same thing. Like 2 years ago, I was talking to some pharmaceutical companies, right? They had zero cost control, zero interest and benefits realization, nothing. They're just printing money, with the various with the Ozempic and all those kind of like diet drugs. It was just printing money left, right, and center. Nobody cared. So, and now you go to the people in Saudi Arabia and they have figured out, they're running out of money. Big changes are afoot. They've now announced so much stuff that even Aramco's dividends can't pay for it all. So, they're actually looking into a funding gap in KSA. Suddenly the wind is changing. Suddenly, we want to talk about benefits of doing things differently, and same thing, if you talk to a pharmaceutical company today, suddenly it's actually the very, very cost conscious, and so that's the other thing that I see. It comes and goes in phases. For a long time, banks the same thing. Banks are printing money, and I was teaching a big bank this morning, and I'm a bit more dressed up than usual, and of course for you guys, they never really took much care about their cost and really realizing the benefits of their projects. And then suddenly they started doing it. And now they're really doing it because AI and all that kind of stuff is really seriously eroding their business. And they're kind of scared. And suddenly they pay attention again. And suddenly benefits realization is a big topic. But 5 years ago, they wouldn't have thought about that, right? They happily invested in these big projects and didn't really think twice about it, So it seems to come and go. And then for some others, I think it might be really difficult. I mean, in some organizations, it's just politically very difficult, right? So change might be initiated here, benefits are realized over there, right? So they don't, for them, the reward of tracking the benefits doesn't outweigh the political cost of sorting it out. I think it's a fair assessment. If they make that assessment honestly, that's a fair assessment, I think. And some others, and I think that's when it comes to technical problem where it's easily solvable, it's a measurement challenge. And so they actually struggle with what should be KPIs that we're tracking, how will we track the benefits of the change, how will we follow up on that, and that's technical work, right? That can be solved, and you can be very good at it, and you can be more smarter with these KPIs than with other KPIs. So obviously, but that's a technical challenge, right? So whenever I have a client who says, yes, we would love to track the benefits, we just don't know how, I said, all right, then, that's easy. The political stuff, that's probably the hardest. And then there's the whole thing where we just don't care. It's like, all right, I'll give you a call in 2 years and find out.
All right.
If you still don't care, right? I mean, that's impossible to work with those people, right?
Well, thanks
My
for
observation. I don't know, Teddy, what you think.
Well, I do agree with you. I mean, I'm in that fight now, and I joined this company just to finish my master's. So once again, thanks, Alex, for that. And benefits realization, the management or even the activity just is a no-go. And to your point, Alex, it is the politics, it is the hassle of doing it. And I think we're slipping back to the days where the only measure of success is whether internal or external users are happy with it. And that is it. So I was talking to some colleagues of mine, maybe the idea, and there might be sacrilegious comment, but maybe the idea of the iron triangle just holds no weight anymore. Success depends upon whoever is the decision maker.
And the other thing, I think we had an article out a while ago, 2 years ago now, I think something like that. It was called Beyond the Plan Execute Logic. And in that, the data that we crunched showed very much sort of, I mean, we all know it from satisfaction measurements, right? Satisfaction is defined as the expectation versus the experience, customer satisfaction, right? And the same holds true when we're evaluating success of projects or change initiatives, that, it's how they performed, what they achieved, and what the expectation was. And I think as we wrote that article, because hardly anybody ever talked about expectation management. That as project leaders or change leaders, yes, we've spent an awful lot of time thinking, getting our team and the change to perform as planned, but actually we can, we should also spend a lot of time on managing the expectations to where it's likely going to land, right? And that's a really important bit we don't do enough of, to your point, right? And I'm absolutely, I always think is that, if the stakeholders happy, everybody's happy. And and it's always hard to say something a failure, something a success, because you can fail spectacular, but we've learned from it. So what was the greatest example I recently thought a little bit about? Oh, Amazon using AI for CV screening. I don't know if anybody remembered that disaster. So, and suddenly the AI trained on Amazon's employee data only selected white males for job interviews because it was trained on the existing workforce at Amazon, right? So, and then they found that out, and then the press found out, and it was very embarrassing, and that was, total disaster. So, and then, at least we learned from it. Right, and made the next version much, much better. We've done a completely new approach. Now it's all human and machine integrated. We've trained better on who actually our candidates for the future is. So we know we shouldn't train on the candidates of the past, but of the candidates of the future kind of thing. We've done a big team. They did another project. They learned from it and they present it as a learning opportunity. Same thing when thinking about one of the other big spectacular failure is the, Dyson, the Hoover people, so the vacuum cleaner people and so on. They try to build a car, don't know if anybody noticed that. So James Dyson, the founder, had this idea. He wanted to build the car that has the longest range electric car. And so he pushed the team to make the range longer and longer and longer and longer. And of course, the thing got heavier and heavier and heavier, and the battery, and then, you know, so, and it's kind of complicated. And in the end, it was something that would cost, I think, about $500,000 per car, which basically meant that the target market shrunk to probably about 6 people in Asia that would ever buy this car. And because it was the pet project of the founder of the company, it was impossible to kill. It took like 3-4 years longer than it should have. It was apparent to everybody that this is going to be an unmitigated economic disaster, you know. But then when they went out to it and said, no, you know, they spent so much money, they had to inform the financial markets, they wrote it off. So they had to make an announcement about this. They couldn't just quietly let it go away. So that was, but when they finally announced it, then the statement was, but we learned so much, right? Your next generation of your vacuum cleaner at your home will benefit from the massive breakthroughs we have made in that battery technology with this. I mean, they spent 400 million or something like that, insane amount of money on this completely, on this failed product development, right? So, but, you know, the big lesson, the big learning was, don't look at that. Don't look at what we spent on this. The important thing is we learned so much about battery technology that we will have the best handheld vacuums for a long time in the industry because, you know, this has sent us light years ahead. No. Success is always in the eye of the beholder, you know, you know, and failure, you can only say really failure is if you cancel a project. And we also know that that never happens because of a technology issue. Typically those can be fixed. You know, projects only really get cancelled if the stakeholders have lost their confidence, their trust in the project that they can deliver. You know, once you've lost that, you know, that's, you know, it's never the technology didn't work. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Cool.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Teddy, for bringing that up. Alex, I just have one contribution I'd like to invite. Louise had put in the chat there that she's seen some benefits outcomes measured done well. So I was wondering, Louise, if you could maybe just within a minute explain to us how it worked well. Just high level, if you don't mind, Louise. Okay, maybe not ready. She did say that there's a connectivity issue where she is anyway. It's fine.
I share that with them because, as you said in the introduction, I'm teaching with the UK government something called the Major Projects Leadership Academy. And in that, we were talking about benefits management actually, and somebody said, no, in my organization, there's no problem with benefits management because as soon as you get your project case approved, they take your headcount out. So you better not be late, or, you know, and it's usually headcount out rather than, you know, it's the public sector, so it's always about cost, not about revenues, you know, so yeah. Cool. Right. Let me quickly share you some more insights on trust. We've got about a half an hour left, so it's a brilliant discussion so far here that we had. So when we looked at trust, and the share going again, there we go. So when we looked at trust, trust-based relationship, always good to think about. Here, the biggest leader, and I forgot who was earlier in the chat who posted a very similar version. I think it might have been Robert. We used Meister's trust equation from David Meister, the big Harvard professor who is manufacturing is lean. He's one of those lean gurus, and he came up with this trust equation when he wrote a little book on people who work in an advisory capacity to bring lean to organizations. That's kind of that was the main thrust of it. And so this was from the book, The Trusted Advisor. And we picked that because we thought about it in that change leaders and the change itself is almost like a professional service in the organization. So that's why we picked that, because there was that analogy to, you know, what we would expect from consultants, lean consultants in this particular form, where that originally came from change consultant to do. And so trust is built by these three things there: credibility, reliability, intimacy. So credibility is trust built by words, stuff that's on the CV, qualifications, the little certification letters behind on your business card. Reliability is that we deliver as we promise. So we keep our commitments, we walk the talk. So that's trust built by actions. Intimacy is a little bit as a mix of empathy, psychological safety. So it's kind of, it's two-way empathy. That's kind of the important thing. It's two-way empathy, because empathy is just one way. So it's two-way empathy. That's the key thing here. So we understand stakeholders and users. Those are kind of the people that we focused on here, so that in the project, the people understood what's happening there, and the users and the stakeholders understood that as well. So that's the element of intimacy here. Psychological safety is a good backdrop of that, right? So sharing, having a space where you share bad news, where you can talk about things you don't want to be talked about widely. So confidence in a conversation, those kind of things, confidence in the confidentiality of the information. So all of that forms that bucket of intimacy here. And then the self-orientation. That means that it's not, you know, it's a balance between my agenda and a stakeholder's agenda or user's agenda. So that, you know, if it's only my agenda, if I win, if I get promoted because I landed the change successfully, but you lose your job, zero trust, obviously. You know, it couldn't be smaller than that. So it's kind of like the best thing when this is not an impact. So is when sort of there's a clear win-win situation. We have a common goal that we are chasing. So if I win, you win. If the change gets done successfully, your work gets easier. So that's the self-orientation there by which it is destroyed. So we use that, and then we tested that, we tested that. That's the numbers. I've got a better chart because, as you can see there, not all of these things were statistically significant. The ones that were statistically significant were really interesting, are the ones in orange here. So when it comes to stakeholders, is that intimacy, and it's the self-orientation. So having, you know, knowing what's in it for the stakeholder, being able to communicate that is trust building in the change and in the initiative, and then the leaders of the initiative. And for end users, it's also that element of credibility. I have done it before. Right. And for me, the biggest key takeaway, and that's why I gave it that title there on the left, is when we're thinking about the narrative and how we communicate change. So, you know, I think that every interactions we have with these two groups, stakeholders and end users, so up and down, you know, every single one of those, we should see as an opportunity to build trust. That's my fundamental assumption. And that means that, you know, what I thought about this is sort of around us, and sort of that too often we see project status reports or updates on change initiatives, updates on transformations. We see those and they talk about that reliability element. They talk about achievements, they talk about KPIs, they talk about milestones, about trainings, about numbers, right? That is interesting information, but it's not fundamental to building trust in this change situation. So, you know, it is built through that two-way empathy, that intimacy element of it, and it is built by joint orientation. So, and that's kind of what I mean here by, do we need to change the narrative? Because it is all around, you know, sort of being clear about what's in it for them. So what's in it for the stakeholder, what's in it for the user, and can we then also put that into words that demonstrate that we've been listening to them, that we have established that element of intimacy, so that I know that certain elements are not going very well, you know, that they might have shared, and sort of, you know, it's things that are not going very well that might otherwise reflect better on the performance, but actually what that says, look, this process is clearly broken, right? We can call it out. So we understand the frustration of working at that. So that kind of level of empathy, and then fixing it. And that's also featuring into sort of somewhere we've seen that about the why. And as I said before, right, so that the why, that's the what's in it for me. And that's the important thing. So it's not about the grand vision, because if that gets flowed down the organization, that creates more resistance than it solves. So the big why is, you know, has its places. It does have its places. It has its places when it's done in a way that explains, you know, what are the common goals that we all chase here. And the other thing that we observed is, right, sort of since Sinek wrote this book, it has definitely changed how we think about change communication. And when we looked at that kind of communication, you know, so 2009, hopefully I wrote it down here on my slide to remember that, the book came out. What we also observed is that a lot of leaders actually forget just focus on the why, you know, so start with why. It didn't say end with it as well. So that's, but that's what often happens in practice. So we often forget to then communicate what is going to happen, how's it going to happen. And so, and that, you know, just focusing on the why often leads to sort of top-down communication, which then creates lack of commitment to change or resistance. But also often a great why sugarcoats some bad pills. So, and as soon as people believe that it's not the full story, again, around the self-orientation, some people might lose their jobs, you know, their friends might lose their jobs. That's not in their agenda, that's not in their motives. So that there is, again, sort of an erosion of trust coming out of this. But so for us, sort of the good template script is, you know, when we're thinking about communicating and leading these things, it's the why, but then also the what will happen. How can the person we're talking to, a stakeholder or user, be part of that journey? And how can they make their voice heard in this process? And the final thing on this one is we then also looked into some sort of, because communication is obviously the thing that builds trust over time, you know, assuming, you know, you don't start with, there might be some trust. And we looked into some sort of how effective where people are communicating. So effectiveness of communication was also part of the framework earlier of the 4 things that worked. And the comms professionals stick out. They're much better at communicating than anybody else. But the other really interesting thing and funny finding I wanted to share with you is, a little point of option here, is that the comms people, the professionals, okay, once we look at, these things here, so the effectiveness of communication, they're obviously the highest, but the trust they build with the end users here on this side and the trust they build with the stakeholders, that is the absolute lowest. So they're very good at communicating, but when they're communicating, it's not building trust. So the most trusted communicators for senior stakeholders is middle management. So the people they interact with a lot, if they are the communicators about the change, that builds trust. And first line management, business unit management, frontline management, those people, they are most trusted by the end users. So the end users trust when the messaging, when the communication about the change directly comes from their boss. So that's kind of the last thing I wanted to leave us with and give us a little bit more of just going to skip this one because it's the same, and just a little bit of a summary of this, and then we can sort of discuss a little bit more. So sort of trust relationships, most important lever for organizational transformation. The other ones are communication, training, management, ownership. Those are kind of the key 4 ones, the high priority ones. The clear rationale, not so much. The structured approach, the framework, not so much. Early end user involvement, very difficult, too difficult to make a dent. But when it comes to trust, we used credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation as a framework. It is important that we emphasize all 4 of those elements. So how can we do that? And then for the others, as you just seen that we talked about vision and purpose, you must do that, but it needs to help trust emotionally and cognitively. So what's in it for them is very, very important to convince people cognitively. A nice vision helps people to buy into the change emotionally. And as you see in some communicators, some middle managers, when they communicate upwards, and first line management, when they communicate downwards, those are the most trust-based sources of communication. So the big thing inside here on the trust is that when we want to build trust for the change into the change, that we should use the already existing trust networks that are there so we can borrow trust from others. So that's what I wanted to share. And we've got several question or comments.
Right. All right, please feel free to unmute. The floor is open. Maybe I could ask a more direct question. I think from some of your past experiences, any of you, has anything stuck out from the presentation? Was just maybe that aha moment. I think for me, it was the trust aspect, you know, having so much weighting in terms of change impact.
That's for me. And the other thing was that vision, rationale, purpose,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that it didn't do anything, that it did exactly the opposite as intended. That makes just people angry.
That's
if
true.
it was told them, right? And we were talking about the other day, Kim and I, Kim was one of the co-authors, we were talking, and he's a consultant full-time, I'm the academic full-time, and the consultant part-time, he's the other way around. And we're talking about what have we learned from this and what are we doing differently? And he said, you know, and we both had the same thing, right? I worked at McKinsey, he worked at Implement, or works at Implement Consulting, and spent so much time on polishing slides for the CEO to go out and say, this is our AI vision, whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And he said this, and, you know, I'm now telling everybody, stop doing that, do something more productive, you know? So that's completely wasted effort. And he said, and the other day we were talking about this, and he said in reflection, he said, I actually did it. You know, sounds crazy, but I actually did it. And guess what? It actually is going better. You know, so where we normally would have a project and a project plan would propose to a client that we're first going to deliver a great vision, you know, create a vision statement for the change, blah, 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 you know, and he said, no, just, I'm not going to do that. And, you know, and I'm now a senior partner, so I can make these decisions. So on the projects I work on or my teams work on, we're not doing that, and actively tell the client that is a bad idea if they were to try. And guess what? You know, it frees it up so much to do way more interesting things, you know. So, you know, sort of invest the effort to co-creation process where you hear the voices of the organization of what's going well, what's not going well, right? So much more interesting things you could do than, you know, sitting there for the first 4 or 6 weeks of a change initiative to polish a vision.
That's it. I think what also stuck out for me was just the bit on the communication. I think the one challenge that we get, you know, if you're doing change management, you're a change consultant. When it comes to communicating, I think, you know, normally you get the pressure to communicate, and trying to get that message across that, you know, the credible source of the message is very important. So whoever does the communication, it's someone that they've built a relationship with already within the organization. So that that comes across, you know, much more. I think Nyaradzo made the same observation. He said that, you know, you touched on the benefits in communicating to the people. Tell it like it is. You know, this will cause thinking it would cause instability in the organization right from the beginning. Yeah, we do have a way of holding back on tough conversations, right? It only makes it worse. We think it's a magic wand to sort it out somewhere down the road. Yeah.
It never does, right? And I mean, for me, a long time ago, I was doing a change project. There was a headcount reduction in a bankrupt bank. They were loss making. And it came to that moment when, you know, so stereotypically consultant, right? Where you actually have to tell people that they're fired, you know, and local leadership was weak enough. So they were so uncomfortable. We had to do it on their behalf. You know, it's kind of weird beyond belief, but anyway.
Yes.
The conversation, and immediately, you know, I kid you not, and I found that quite hilarious and great afterwards. The person that I said, I'm so sorry, you know, it's great. You've seen, you know all the reasons, and you know all the reasons we're here, why this is happening, because it's also unsustainable, and unfortunately, you will have no longer a role in this organization, and this is the offer we're going to make you, and this is our proposal, how we're going to manage your exit, blah blah blah, right? So, and then he said, wait a second. He opens his suitcase, takes out a thing that certifies the disability, certifies the mental disability. It was in Europe, so a whole raft of workers' rights protection kicks in, right? And I look at the thing, and it is dated the morning after I arrived to lead on that change project, right? So he basically saw me walking up the corridor. Next day, he walked to his doctor and got the note, right? Before he came to work, he didn't wait. He knew what was coming, right? And I think that is, so I think that's what's happening, right? And these days, now, I'm doing a lot more research on this. There's some research that is on this kind of subject, and there's a beautiful phrase that gossip is improvised news. So if there's no news, then gossip will fill the gap.
True.
Right?
True.
So, and that can go any which way. So, and that's why I think if there are some disbenefits, probably layoffs, right? That's kind of the worst disbenefits you can have in a change situation, right? We need to be upfront about this. If the timing isn't clear, say so. If the size and the total impact isn't clear, we kind of need to say so. And then we probably should also say, but when we expect clarity of that to have happened, so when we know exactly who might be impacted, how many people, etc., etc. But you can't gloss over the fact, because people are not stupid, like this person who worked in an archive. Their job was to bring folders of case files to the desk, and that was their job. They clearly saw it coming the moment I stepped into that, and they found out that so people are not stupid, so they know what's coming, right? And in the absence of that, it will just create lots of gossip and even more friction than, even if you say, yes, that's happening, we don't know these couple of things that are also very important, but we will tell you.
Yeah, that's true. I always think of that, I think painting that says something to the fact that silence does communicate. And at times the communication is not what you actually mean to hear. So that's quite interesting about the information gaps right there that you've mentioned. HUCMI wrote something here about early user involvement. Quite interesting that early user involvement had absolutely no bearing on the success of business change. It's quite important. Would you like to elaborate on that?
So when we looked at that,
go for it, Alex. Go for it.
Yeah, there was two camps. There were some people who thought they didn't have to involve the users. I kid you not, then in our 155 cases, there were 6 that decided that, we don't have to talk to the users. It's just a tech upgrade. Or we're just going to make this little change. Nothing will happen, right? They were all massively wrong about this. So they were all like, eventually they found out that they need to engage the user, and led to them being late and over budget. But ultimately they delivered the benefits, so it didn't really matter.
That's it, yeah.
So it was kind of, there were some people that actually started with this assumption and then had to learn it the hard way. But the thing that we found is that from the others is there was also maybe a little bit of a hesitancy to actually engage with the users. Because if you ask them what they want and you listen to them, they kind of expect you to do that. So, and that typically changes the scope, that costs more money, that costs time. So the better projects had that planned in. So they knew that would happen. And they created that kind of buffer, that kind of budget to deal with these things. Some projects made the mistake of actually then going to the users and asking them what they want. They got a very sensible list, but then they didn't have the money or the time to actually do anything with that. That doesn't make anybody happy. Why did you ask in the first instance if you're not going to do it? So that is another problem of that. But the third one, and that's kind of where people honestly tried and then didn't succeed. I think that was the other that was the most interesting category. And that was because it is so hard to get to really knowledgeable end users. That's what they found. So if you want the real expert in the organization, so you say, here's our change initiative, right? I need 0.1 FTE from finance, an expert.
That's it.
And that doesn't work. Just so doesn't work. So half a day a week, and if you make that ask, as a lot of projects did, you get the people that finance can spare. You don't get the busy people. You don't get the people that really know their stuff, because they are busy. So, and that's what we found. And so what doesn't work, these fractional users, the point something FTEs, people that aren't involved and sort of you only specify on the per FTE basis, it just doesn't work. And you don't get the right people. So worked brilliantly was one bank. What they did is for the next 18 months, they planned exactly when they need an expert. Because as you can imagine, this is a big bank, right? They have like thousands of change projects every single year, big and small ones, probably 10 big ones, and then hundreds and thousands of small ones. So these experts are in massive demand, and they actually have a job to do. Okay? So that program or that project was very specific. For the next 18 months, they would plan out when they would have a prototype to test, and then they would ask, I need 2 people from HR in March, 17 to 18, 2026. I want ideally these people. Can you send me really your best people for 2 days? I only need them for 2 days, and I gave you more than 6 months warning. I need them on those 2 days. We will have a prototype ready by then, and they really just give it a good kicking. That worked. So, otherwise, it is so hard to get to the true knowledge. And then the other thing is, once you have found them, they change jobs. They might leave. You get turnover. If you have something that takes 3 years or so, there was a lot of churn in the base. So there's a lot of turnover issues as well. So that's why it's so difficult. So yes, so it's almost, rather than that kind of blanket, it is exactly to your point, rather than the blanket thing, involve them in that. And the other thing we found is, again, more information is in here. And no, not yet another research papers, Roland. I saw that comment earlier. We're still working on those. Is users need to be involved in testing, obviously, right? So we need feedback from them, and that's where they're really important. So they need to be involved in testing, and we should test early. We didn't find any better results about impacts and benefits and those kind of things if users were involved in designing systems or designing processes. Sort of from the interviews we then learned that if you rely on users a lot to design future systems or future processes, it's just fixing stuff. It's fixing stuff that's irksome, that doesn't quite work today. It's sort of a lost opportunity of really reinventing the thing, of bringing some kind of sometimes really revolutionary thinking to it. So as Steve Jobs once said, it's not the job of the user to know what they want. Ford said, or Carnegie said, or actually nobody really ever said this. I think I made a quote. I tried to find the source of this. If they had asked me back then, they would have just said they want a faster horse, right? And I think Henry Ford never said that, but somehow people think it. He did. So and that's kind of the thing, right? Sort of users are really good for testing things and finding flaws in prototypes, and we should test as early as possible. Users are not very useful to be involved in systems and process design right up front. That's
Thanks
what we
so much for that. Great. I think there was quite a bit of a few other comments made around user involvement. I think from my experience, I think it's almost programmed on the project, because you get that section that says UAT, user acceptance testing. And we think that's the only time that we should actually get involved with users.
Yes, and I think we want to change that, right? I'm sitting on the on a special task force of the insights team of the Project Management Institute. So if you're connected to those kind of things, and there, this whole thing is the new definition of success is all around value. Was this project value for money, basically? Did it create the value to offset the effort spent? Which kind of means that benefits and value creation should be part of every single project definition and concept of project, where previously we thought about this only in programs, right? And that's a strange distinction that is never true.
All right. Thanks a lot for that, Alex. I'm aware that we just have 5 minutes left. And I know, Sharon, you'd like to say something maybe after the session. Can we probably just accommodate maybe 2 more questions before we close off? Anyone else? Louise, you're quite active there. Some interesting insights from you on users. All right. No, that's all right. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I have to say I would challenge that notion that user involvement makes absolutely zero difference. We can't, you know, we just can't do change without user involvement to some degree, and it isn't just about user acceptance testing. You know, if you want to implement change well, you've got to understand if you're changing something that a user is using today, you know, what impact is that going to have on them? And once you know what impact it's going to have on them, you know how to help them with all the rest of it, all the communication and the change piece, you know, that'll sort of drive exactly what you do to sort of get them to that new way of working. So I don't really see how no involvement would ever be.
No, that's not no involvement. So I think that's the important thing. It's not no involvement. And I'm also not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying, as we looked at 155, and they found really, really hard to get to the real experts in the organization, the real knowledgeable users that can help them. So the stuff that works really, really well is around prototyping, right? So if you have a new process and understanding how this is working, right? Things like actually a role play long before you put any changes in place or anything. It's like, let's role play this through, right? Those kind of like things where you start evaluating developing ideas, that is really, really important. For those, you need to involve the users. So I didn't mean as we shouldn't do any user involvement. I'm saying it's really, really complicated. It's actually quite difficult to get some meaningful user engagement and user involvement going. Because the ones are really busy. So, and that's why I think it's, you know, we need to do a lot of hard work on that, and it requires careful design how we do that and how we get the most out of it.
I think there's loads of touch points in all of the change projects I've worked on over many years where users get involved. You know, I mean, there is that sort of design stage and the business analysis stage, and then the impact stage, and you know, it's just the list goes on. I just don't see how you know, change can be delivered successfully without you know, or I don't see how zero user involvement has any benefit.
No,
really. But you know, that's just
that's also a disaster, right? So as I said, so we found six of our 155 cases, they didn't involve the users or did not intend to involve the users and fell flat on their face and had to do it anyway. Right. So they learned all the hard way that this is you must do it. Yeah. But to do it well is really hard. You can do it badly very easily. And most projects actually do it sort of not very well. Yeah.
All right. Great stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alex. This was very, very, I think I had several wow moments, you know, my end. And I would like now to maybe invite Sharon, you know, if you can close for us. Yeah, we just have 1 minute left. All right, Sharon.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Marlon. Thanks, Alex. It was a great session. So yeah, just let me do a little bit of the closing. Just a second. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So yes, yeah, I just wanted to say yes, if you need any support or anything that you need to ask us, please do follow us on LinkedIn. You can contact us there as well. So I'll send the slides later with all the contact details. I've also put in the details in the chat as well, the links. So do contact us. So this is for Dr. Alexander Budzier and Vincent. And just to tell you a little bit about Vincent. So Vincent is actually the CEO of Human Change Management Institute and also Change Management Alliance. And Change Management Alliance is actually the premier knowledge provider of the change management. Sorry, HUCMI is actually the premier knowledge provider of the Change Management Alliance. So it's more like a community for change management. Do join us. The link is in the chat as well. And Marlon, thanks so much, Marlon. So Marlon is the CEO for Tribal Consulting. Do reach out to him for anything at all. And of course, myself, Sharon J. Coy, call me Sharon. And yeah, my link is also there. And moving forward, so yeah, we do have a global change management survey that's going on right now. This is sponsored by CMA and HUCMI. Do support us. We'll need to hear, I mean, it'll be great to hear your feedback as well. And then last but not least, HUCMI is providing a free version of the HCM book tools. Do log into the website to get yours, to get your access for it. And I think that's basically it. Any questions?
Wow. All within 1 minute, eh, Sharon? Well done. Hey?
All within 1 minute, yeah.
Great stuff. All right. No, thank you so much, everyone. We will share the presentation, as we said before, and we're looking forward to connecting with you on LinkedIn as well. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Have a good one. Good afternoon.
Thank you
I'll send
so
the
much,
slides now,
Alexander.
and then
Thank you so
can
much, Alex. It was
Yes.
wonderful, very
Very good.
insightful, very inspiring.
Food for thought.
Great
Always,
section.
always happy.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
was busy writing. Yeah, hey, yeah.
I wrote it down for you.
Oh, thank you.
20% off on Amazon at the moment.
Okay, perfect. Oh, man.
Alex, we will share the
slides.
people that were registered in this section. Actually, we have almost 200 people
200, yeah.
enrolled on LinkedIn. We have their contacts. Some of them allow us to make contact with them, so you can also make contact with those people and talk a little bit more about your book. Of course, I will buy it right now and read it as soon as possible.
Yes.
It seems to be great. And
Yeah.
yes, you can use this information for those that allow us to make contacts. And thank you so much, man. It was great.
Cool. That sounds good. And yeah, perfect. No, happy that we did this. And I will send you the slides now so you can share them with people. Yeah, or when you upload the video and share the video, you can attach that to that as well. Cool.
All right.
Okay, I just
Yes,
ask you to please send me your email. You can message me on LinkedIn, and so I can share this the contacts people enrolled in this section.
Cool. We'll do that. Wonderful. I'll do that. Yes, I saw we connected on LinkedIn a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, all.
Yeah, then.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.